found a really good article on these people. And terrorism is used by underground organizations against state institutions. This is why they attack the agents, the police, politicians, anybody that would had to do with this country's security. So, for material benefits of the welfare state, these people think they're entitled. That's something I keep telling everybody. As ethnic minorities revive hopes of separatism and as radical political organizations, it replaces riots and protest demonstrations, and this is an ideology. Because its effectiveness in influencing political events depends on arousing emotions, the psychological reactions of its target audiences are significant. Patterns of small group interaction are a significant part of the explanation of terrorism activity. In an internal war situation, terror is a symbolic act designed to influence political behavior by extra-normal means, entailing the use of threat or use of violence. It's an extra normality. Terrorism exceeds the bounds of socially acceptable violence. It's a symbolic nature, and the targets of the terrorism are symbols of the state or of social norms and structure. The bomb they planted on the Astoria against the military, the kidnapping of Martin Nance of the military. To achieve political influence, terrorism depends on its power to arouse emotions and audiences, including the neutral and the supportive and the antagonistic. The emotional reactions to terrorism, which of course may be unanticipated by the terrorists although they strive to control them, may thus range from terror or acute anxiety to enthusiasm. Terrorism is also practiced by governments, and some characteristics of its processes, effects, and perpetrators are similar to the characteristics of insurgent or agitational terrorism. Insurgent terrorist organizations may use terrorism to control their supporters and to enforce obedience. Potential magnitude of most of the government violence is incomparably greater than that of non-governments. And this is what I keep saying. They're tied back to the government. You're going to have to excuse the mess I'm packing to leave for Bellingham. Local government authorities were reluctant to cooperate. Diversity and variation of the phenomenon, social revolution to reactionary, decentralized or anarchical model, domestic surroundings on an international scale. Now, they went to Jamaica. They stalked a woman from New York City to Jamaica and killed her. Okay. That terrorism be considered simply as criminal violence directed against civilian targets for political motives. And that's very true. They want to bring back a race war. There's attacks on diplomats. They've been doing that in the late 1960s and early 70s. Now, her father, she says, was a terrorist, Karima. So, that would be back then. Because terrorism is perceived as a threat to a government's reputation and international image, if not always to its stability, official bureaucracies are much more interested in the study of terrorism than in that of many other topics of scholarly research. The response to terrorism and the anticipation of future events or threats. So basically, they don't do very much. Modelization means a terrorist can be both mobile and anonymous. Translation of intention into action is modified by chance and opportunity. Initiation of a campaign of terrorism and its continuation in the face of government reaction. The separate functions: public relations, propaganda, fundraising, forgery, weapons purchase, and logistics, as well as those related to planning and engaging in violence. Sharpshooter, a builder of bombs, kidnappings, Now they took hostages. That was Martin Knotts. Specialists in armed attacks. They have people that are, well, they call them snipers. I don't know if they're that good, but I don't know. Paramilitary extremists. Student protest movements are from the middle or upper middle classes. And that's what I said with these people. These people were born with silver spoons in their mouth. These people did not come from the ghetto. Or their parents were not poor. As in contrast of working class backgrounds. They have vague and unrealistic goals. Creation of an ill-defined socialist order. They want transnational character. They want to be able to escape the control of government. It blurs the distinction among different national groups and their context. This is where they keep infiltrating other groups. Transnationalism, a product of that's my page. I don't know what it's part of. Glorification of violence and right-wing ideologies of terrorism may also explain their attraction for mentally disturbed individuals. Individuals showed an early single-minded and awesome bent for violence. Terrorism involves reflective, not impulsive, violence and requires the ability to delay gratification through long and tedious planning stages. And that's exactly what you're seeing with Las Vegas shooting, what you're seeing with Kanika Jenkins, it's what you're seeing with Martin Nance. Prisons are ambivalent in their attitudes to the use of violence, admitted that the purpose of their action had been to cause fear. And this is what they refer to as humane violence. This interrelationship is the more compelling because the ostensible purpose of terrorist groups is to change that environment. Terrorists invariably claim, in fact, that their behavior is the only logical response to external circumstances, but actually it is disturbed or abnormal. These people tend to be psychopaths, predisposed to violence, or mentally abnormal. That's rooted in sociopathy, narcissism, the death wish, or psychological impairment. Unless hierarchical organizations, those with a loose structure and relaxed central direction in the anarchist model, there is less control over membership. And that's exactly what you see in this group. Many terrorist events are painstakingly engineered to avoid ultimate responsibility for violent death. That's not what you really see here. What you see is violent death, but they know enough to try and hide it, that they did it. So it's just the opposite. We're conscious of a need to justify their behavior. They're constantly trying to justify their behavior. Even to the part where they're trying to seem patriotic to get acceptance. Which they are not, because if they were, they wouldn't have never done this crap. They're seduced by the lures of omnipotence and grandeur to compensate for feelings of inferiority or impotence. That is the self-righteousness of terrorism conceals the terrorist insecurities and that terrorism is a response to a lack of self-esteem. Neurotic behavior involves clinging to irrational goals regardless of outcomes, while refusing to engage in any activity that might test one's abilities. Failure leads to aimlessness and dissatisfaction, which makes the individual susceptible to the appeal of terrorist organizations whose goals are equally unrealistic. It's to blame others for their failures and consequently to feel hostility towards the outside world. This is the infiltration of the groups that these people are doing. You got one part of the group infiltrating groups like Antifa, and then you got people like Karima. She's going to Black Lives Matters, gangs, all this other shit. So, I mean, even within the group, there's a split. The glamour and excitement of terrorism, and believe me, these people really do get off on this. They passionate sex afterwards. Perhaps the attraction for some individuals lie partially in the physical danger it comports. Stress seekers, who are attracted to behavior designed to increase the intensity of emotion or level of activation of the organism. Stress seekers carefully plan their behavior. They respond more to internal rather than to external imperatives. The individualistic stress seeker is uncomfortable as a follower. He seeks attention to the point of being narcissistic, self-affirmation in the face of danger. Leaders may be more likely to possess latent dispositions and traits acquired through socialization than make violent, stressful, oppositional behavior attractive. Followers may be attracted more to the group than its activities. Leaders are more likely to be people who combine a lack of scruples with extreme self-assurance. It was found that the leaders often lead by frightening or pressuring their followers. And the first type is the extremely extroverted personality whose behavior is unstable, uninhibited, inconsiderate, self-interested, and unemotional. Well, all you gotta do is listen to the audio to know that. Leaders of terrorist groups, they become substitute parents. And this is this mommy and daddy, and this is the reprogramming that's going on within the group. And you actually hear Karima especially refer to Brittany / Catherine as her mommy. Their behavior, the leader's behavior, is vicious, ferocious, and intractable. But as far as the women's sexual nature, it's the low self-image, alienation, and bitterness of women terrorists. And that's exactly what you see in Karima. Nobody wants to be a leader. Excitement of danger compensates for the absence of feelings. Do not accept responsibility for their actions and dislike boredom and activity. And this is why she's always bopping around from one group to another. She is neurotically hostile, suspicious, aggressive, defensive, and intolerant. They reject criticism and is extremely sensitive to external hostility. And that's exactly what she dishes it out, but she can't take it. That's what you see. Personality defects that would be punished in a normal social setting are rewarded. What does it feel? It feels for the family that they didn't have when they were younger is recognition, acceptance, warmth, and solidity. They became more radical. They were drawn closer to the inner circles that espoused violence. It's only after the association with the group. The choice was then between participating in violence or leaving the group. That's exactly what I say. You do what I want, or It's early mistrust. This mistrust actually leads to rage and fantasies of domination or destruction of the sources that give pleasure or provide sustenance. This usually occurs in adolescence. But if you listen to these people, they don't sound like they're adults. They have extreme identity confusion. They have a negative identity. Ideologies are then the guardians of their identity. And this is what I was talking about a long time ago, about a year and a half ago. When this shatters, yeah, that's when this shit really happens. Oh, here it is. A crisis of identity, when the individual who finds self-definition difficult is suffering from ambiguity, fragmentation, and contradiction, makes some adolescents susceptible to totalism, or to totalistic collective identities that becomes a negative identity, and this is from a vindictive rejection. This is what it comes out as. Many terrorists come from families who exert strong pressure for achievement. If a positive identity is not possible, the individual prefers being a bad person to being nobody or partially somebody. By society as final, individuals may not be pushed into conformity with the worst that people expect of them. To engender negative identities, because minorities may fuse the negative image held of them by the majority of the negative self-image of the group. And this is really interesting because Karima is black, but the rest of the one group that she goes to, one group is black, the other one's white. These things are based on values acquired through early socialization. A separatist terrorism is the me concept of the negative identity, and you see a lot of that in the audio also. Me. What about me? I want my drugs. I want my money. I want. Government also plays a critical role in pushing certain individuals into violent opposition. Now, that's what I said. These people are connected to the government. These people are jailed for quite minor offenses. You see a lot of it. Prostitution only. Stuff like that. They all get off on it. They run away. They're wanted in lots of states. Two individuals are already suffering from identity confusion. The attention paid them by the government not only confirms a negative identity, but makes them feel like somebody. They are gratified to be sufficiently important to be the object of excessive attention, even if that attention is negative. Harassment or surveillance is preferable to being ignored by society. Then the government actually becomes a target of violent opposition and resentment. The child who feared to mount a violent challenge to parents may later try to overcome that fear by attacking external authorities such as political or social elites. And this is where Clinton, all these other politicians that they're doing this to, the ambassadors, the leaders of other countries, this is where all this is coming in at. Clandestine organizations are isolated from the outside world, and isolation often reinforced by living underground with false identities. These people have tons of false identities. Tons. I think I came up with a front and back page on one person. One person. They are very isolated. They follow me around. They stay in the shadows, even when I go out. Group's dominance over individual members and the collective drive toward totalistic control. Both types of groups strictly regulate the sexual relations of their members. In the weather underground, monogamy is discouraged. These people screw everybody and anybody. Except Stephanie. She's the only one in the group that's married. The appearance of morality may also be an attempt to prove that the group's political stand is equally superior. Despite its deviation from the social norm, the deliberate promiscuity of the Weathermen seem to have stemmed in part from a male drive to dominate the females of the organization. They're unconsciously identifying with dead comrades. I have no idea what that one's all about. I'm sure there's probably some interesting reading on that. Information about the outside world is filtered through the group. And how are they doing this? They're putting people out in the streets as prostitutes and drug dealers. So these people stay in the shadows and they stay hidden. And their outside world is coming into them. Growing misperceptions reinforce group beliefs and values. Basically, things get really screwed up. It becomes easier to depersonalize victims and to see the enemy as unmitigatingly hostile. The need to deflect internal conflict that might disturb a vital harmony may lead to extreme aggressiveness toward outside enemies. That's very important. I want you to see that, because that's what I'm going through. There's a risky shift, and I can pinpoint that one with this group, well, better than anybody. The increase in risk-taking propensity may encourage escalation as terrorists become less inhibited by the prospect of negative consequences. They don't believe what they're doing is wrong at all. Way of avoiding personal responsibility for acts of violence. It's in a state of war with the government. And I already went through that. Are engaging in an important fantasy mechanism that makes their participation in violence possible. You know, this anarchy thing, the race war, Antifa, all this other crap. A further consequence of group interaction, which may explain the escalation of terrorist violence, is the possibility of brutalization or graduated desensitization of the performance of acts of terrorism progressively extinguishes discomfort and self-censure. This conditioning process through which the individual comes to seek destructive power is termed brutalization. And this is the programming, what they're doing. They are drugging people, they are raping people, and they are reprogramming people. And this is the brutalization part of it. Okay, this gets passed down through the generations, luckily enough. Most of these idiots don't have any children. The more violence is used, the less controversial its value and acceptability. The ends and means of actions are no longer separable. Not only are values corrupted, but the use of terrorism is tied irrevocably to the values it serves. Basically, to these people at this point, being they've been doing it for so long, it's just fun. And it's actually, I actually have that audio. It's fun. They have early separation anxiety, which is likely to develop towards authority figures perceived as able to ward off danger. This is the constant cop calling they do. Ideological purity of the leader must be above question. And this is what it's going on. I put up a video about Karima having a stanky snatch because she hasn't bathed in over 4 months. And she goes and cries to people. Really? Wash your fucking pussy. The behavior of both leaders and followers is restricted by the terrorist group. Aggressive patterns of behavior are learned from observation or experience. They imitate one another. New behavior, it spreads rapidly and in a contagious fashion. But if there's a decline in activity, it's not being rewarded. So these people are constantly doing shit. And this is why you listen to the audio and you don't really believe it, but they're on a constant high. Not only from drugs, but from what they're doing. A negative identity expect and even seek social disapproval, which confirms their expectations. Terrorism is more a threat to image and reputation than to physical security. This is the way